My daughter left me at the airport with 2 suitcases, a garment bag, and one sentence I still hear in my sleep. Figure it out yourself, Dad. Then she drove away. No hug. No goodbye. Not even a glance in the rearview mirror. I stood beneath the blazing Phoenix sun, watching her silver SUV disappear into traffic while the heat pressed against my face like an open furnace. I was 68 years old, and for the first time in my life, I had absolutely no idea what I was supposed to do next. My name is Harold Mercer. For 36 years, I worked as a structural engineer in Tulsa, Oklahoma. I spent most of my life studying what makes things strong. Bridges, buildings, support beams, foundations. I could look at a structure and tell you where the weakness was hiding. What I never learned was how to recognize a weakness inside my own family. 3 years earlier, my wife, Evelyn, had died. Since then, my daughter, Lauren, had slowly become a stranger. At first, she called every Sunday, then every other Sunday. Eventually, the calls became short messages. Love you, Dad. Hope you're doing okay. Messages that sounded caring until you realized they never required a conversation. Then one Tuesday evening, Lauren called. Dad, I want you to come to Arizona for the weekend. I almost couldn't believe it. She told me her daughter, Sophie, had been asking about me. That was enough. I booked my flight that night. I remember packing that suitcase with a ridiculous amount of excitement. I even packed an old photo album because I thought Sophie might want to see pictures of her grandmother. I thought maybe this trip meant my family was finally coming back to me. I couldn't have been more wrong. Lauren picked me up at the airport Friday afternoon. She hugged me quickly. Too quickly. And she kept her sunglasses on even though we were standing inside the terminal. Sophie wasn't with her. She's busy, Lauren said. But something about the way she said it bothered me. Still, I ignored it. Because when you're a father, you can become dangerously good at explaining away the behavior of someone you love. The weekend began quietly. Saturday evening, my son-in-law, Derek, grilled steaks and talked endlessly about a massive development project outside the city. He called it the biggest opportunity of his career. But Sophie was the reason I started relaxing. She showed me a small robotics machine she'd built for school. She sat beside me on the patio and explained how she'd programmed it to detect obstacles. For the first time in months, I felt useful for something that had nothing to do with money. Then Sunday night, everything changed. After Sophie went upstairs, Lauren and Derek asked me to sit at the kitchen table. Derek placed a thick folder in front of me. It's just estate planning, he said. Inside was a deed transferring part ownership of my Tulsa house. My house. The home Evelyn and I had bought decades ago. The home where Lauren had taken her first steps. Lauren smiled nervously. You'll still live there, Dad. Nothing changes. I looked at the signature line. Then I looked at my daughter. And suddenly, I remembered something my wife once told me. If someone is rushing you to sign something, ask yourself why they couldn't wait. I pushed the folder back. I'll have my attorney look at it first. Nobody spoke. Derek's smile disappeared. Lauren's face hardened. And from upstairs, I heard something that made my stomach tighten. Sophie was crying. I almost stood up. But Lauren stopped me. She's fine. She said it too quickly. That night, I lay awake listening to quiet voices downstairs. I couldn't hear the words, but I could hear the anger. And then I heard Derek say one sentence clearly. If he doesn't sign, we're finished. My heart stopped. Finished with what? The next morning, Lauren suddenly told me my flight had been moved forward. It hadn't. I didn't know that yet. I only knew she was rushing me out. At the airport, she opened the trunk. I pulled out my suitcase. Then I noticed a second garment bag. Derek's expensive jacket was still inside. I held it up. Lauren, this belongs to Derek. She didn't even turn around. Leave it. Then she looked at me through the open window. Her voice was cold. Dad, I have too much going on right now. Figure it out yourself. The SUV pulled away, and I stood there alone. But what Lauren didn't know was that someone was about to walk through those airport doors. Someone I hadn't seen in more than 20 years. Someone who was carrying information that would make that strange folder on the kitchen table suddenly make terrifying sense. A voice called out behind me. Harold? I turned around, and the man standing there looked at me with a smile I hadn't seen since 1999. It's me, Daniel Cross. I stared at him. Then he said 6 words that made my blood run cold. Harold, I've been trying to find you. And suddenly, being abandoned at that airport didn't feel like the worst thing that had happened to me. It felt like the beginning of something much bigger. Daniel Cross stood in front of me holding a black carry-on bag, staring at my suitcases like he already understood something was wrong. For a few seconds, neither of us spoke. Then he smiled. Not the polite smile strangers give each other at airports. A real smile. The kind that reaches the eyes. "Harold Mercer," he said again. "I knew that was you." I looked at him more carefully. He had changed. 27 years had added gray to his hair and lines around his eyes, but I recognized him. Daniel had been 23 years old when he first walked into the engineering firm where I worked. Fresh out of community college. Nervous, quiet, and terrified of making mistakes. I had trained him myself. "Daniel." He laughed. "I was hoping you'd remember me." I shook his hand. Then he looked at my luggage. "Why are you sitting out here 4 hours before your flight?" I almost lied. That was my instinct. I had spent years protecting Lauren from uncomfortable questions. But something about seeing Daniel made me tired of pretending. So I told him. Not every detail. Just enough. "My daughter brought me to Arizona for the weekend," I said. "Then she dropped me here and left." Daniel's expression changed immediately. "She left you here?" I nodded. He glanced toward the road. Then back at me. "Harold, are you okay?" That question nearly broke me. Not because it was complicated. Because it was simple. Nobody had asked me that all weekend. I looked down at my hands. "I suppose I'll be fine." Daniel didn't accept the answer. "Come on." "Where?" "There's a restaurant inside the terminal. Air conditioning, comfortable chairs, and coffee that won't kill you." Despite everything, I almost smiled. We walked through security together. Once we sat down, Daniel ordered coffee for both of us. For several minutes, he said nothing. He simply let me breathe. Then he leaned forward. "I've actually been trying to find you for almost 3 months." I stared at him. "Why?" He reached into his briefcase and pulled out a business card. It had his name on it. Daniel Cross, Crosspoint Structural Group. I looked at the title underneath. Founder and Principal Engineer. I raised my eyebrows. "You own an engineering company?" 74 employees now. I couldn't help smiling. The nervous young man who once apologized every time he asked a question had built his own firm. I had no idea. "That's because you disappeared from the industry." "I retired." "I know." He paused. "That's actually why finding you was difficult." Then he told me why. Daniel had been invited to speak at a national engineering conference later that year. During the event, they planned to honor engineers who had influenced younger professionals. "They asked me who had the biggest impact on my career," he said. I shrugged. "And you gave them my name?" I didn't hesitate. Something tightened in my chest. I looked away. Daniel continued. "I've spent 20 years teaching young engineers the things you taught me. You know what I tell them?" "What?" "Never trust a structure just because it looks strong." I smiled. "That's not exactly what I taught you." "No." He leaned closer. "You taught me to find what someone doesn't want me to notice." That sentence stayed with me, because suddenly I remembered the folder on Lauren's kitchen table. The deed. The rushed signatures. The mysterious financing deadline. I reached into my jacket and pulled out the copy I'd brought home. Daniel read it carefully. His expression became serious. "Where did you get this?" "My daughter and her husband wanted me to sign it." "Did you?" "No." He exhaled. "Good." I watched his eyes move across the page. Then he stopped. "What project does your son-in-law own?" I told him. "Derek's development company. The project outside Phoenix. The one he'd called his greatest opportunity." Daniel's face went completely still. "What?" "The development." "Why?" He looked at me. "What's the name?" "Canyon Crest Estates." Daniel didn't answer immediately. He opened his phone. Typed something. Then looked back at me. "Harold, I need you to listen carefully." My stomach tightened. "I know that project." "Why?" "Because one of my former clients is involved in a lawsuit connected to it." I couldn't breathe for a moment. Daniel continued. "There are allegations that construction reports were altered." I stared at him. "Altered how?" "Enough to make investors believe the site was safer than it actually was." The airport suddenly seemed strangely quiet. Daniel lowered his voice. "There are already questions about the foundation work." I thought about Derek's words from Saturday night. The crown jewel of his company. The project that would change everything. Then I remembered the deed. My house. My daughter's insistence that it was only estate planning. Daniel looked directly at me. "How much is your house worth?" I told him. He sat back. Then he asked another question. "Harold, did they tell you why they needed your name on that deed?" I swallowed. They said it was for financing. Daniel nodded slowly. And that might be exactly what they wanted you to believe. My hands went cold. What are you saying? He turned his phone toward me. On the screen was an article about Canyon Crest Estates. And beneath the headline was a number that made my heart sink. More than $3.7 million in damages. I stared at the screen. Then Daniel said something even worse. The lawsuit isn't the only problem. He paused. There may be an investigation. And suddenly, the folder I'd refused to sign wasn't just about my daughter's future. It might have been about saving her husband's collapsing business with my home. But there was one question I couldn't stop thinking about. If that was true, why had Lauren been so desperate to get me out of the house before my attorney could see the document? Daniel looked at me. Harold, I think you need to find out exactly what your daughter knew. And for the first time, I wondered whether Lauren had brought me to Arizona because she wanted to see her father, or because she needed something from him before it was too late. I didn't sleep on the flight home. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw that folder sitting on Lauren's kitchen table. The deed, the blank signature line, her nervous smile, and Derek's words echoing in my head. If he doesn't sign, we're finished. By the time I landed in Tulsa, I had stopped asking myself whether something was wrong. Something was wrong. The only question was how deep it went. I drove straight home. The house felt different when I opened the door. It was the same brick ranch where Evelyn and I had raised Lauren. Same hallway. Same photographs. Same old wooden clock ticking in the living room. But that night, the house felt like a place I suddenly needed to protect. I placed Derek's garment bag over a chair. I almost laughed. He had tried to use my home to protect himself from a financial disaster, and somehow I'd still brought his jacket home. I didn't call Lauren. Instead, I called my oldest friend, Raymond Hale. Raymond had been a construction manager before retiring. He knew the difference between a bad deal and a dangerous one. I told him everything. He listened quietly. When I finished, he asked one question. Did you sign anything? No. He exhaled. Then don't. That's it. No. His voice became serious. Tomorrow, you take that document to your attorney. The next morning, I met with my lawyer, Martin Keller. Martin had handled my affairs for more than 20 years. He read the deed once. Then again. He took off his glasses. Samuel, do you understand what this actually does? I shook my head. It puts Lauren and Derek on the property title. My stomach dropped. But I keep living there. Yes. For the rest of my life. Yes. So what's the problem? Martin leaned back. The problem is that you would no longer own the house alone. He explained it carefully. If Derek became a legal owner and a serious judgment was entered against him, his ownership interest could potentially become exposed to creditors. My home could become connected to a legal fight I had nothing to do with. I stared at the document. They told me this was about avoiding probate. Martin gave me a long look. It may help with that, but that's not the only thing this document accomplishes. That sentence hurt more than I expected, because now I understood. They hadn't lied completely. They had simply told me the smallest piece of the truth. Martin asked what Derek's company was called. When I told him, his expression changed. Canyon Crest Estates? Yes. He opened his computer. After a few minutes, he looked up. There are public records involving that development. My hands tightened around the arms of the chair. What kind of records? Investor disputes. Construction allegations. Financial claims. I felt something inside me collapse. Not the house. Not my retirement. Trust. That was what was cracking. I drove home and sat in the kitchen for almost an hour. I thought about Lauren as a little girl. How she used to run through this same room after school. How Evelyn would pretend to be angry when Lauren stole cookies before dinner. How I'd once believed nothing in this house could ever separate us. Then I remembered the airport. Figure it out yourself. I couldn't understand how a daughter could say those words to her father. Then I realized something even more painful. Maybe I had spent years teaching Lauren that I would always rescue her. Every time she needed money, I helped. When tuition became difficult, I paid it. When Derek's credit wasn't strong enough for a vehicle loan, I signed with them. After Evelyn died, Lauren cried one night and told me they were struggling. So I started sending her money every month. I never asked questions, because I thought helping my daughter was what a father was supposed to do. That afternoon, I asked my accountant, Nadia Patel, to review my financial records. What she found made me sit completely still. There were regular transfers to Lauren's account. Hundreds of dollars every month. For years. There were school payments, loan obligations, and other financial commitments I'd almost forgotten about. Nadia looked at me. Samuel, you've been supporting them for a long time. I swallowed. Yes. Did they ever ask you to stop? I gave a bitter smile. No. That night, I finally understood something. They hadn't just needed my house. They had already built their lives around my willingness to save them. And if Derek's business really was in trouble, my house might have been the final piece they needed. But there was something Nadia discovered that none of us expected. She placed another document in front of me. Samuel, there's something else. I looked at her. What? She pointed to a recent financial transaction. This happened shortly before your trip to Arizona. I stared at the date. My heart began pounding. The transaction wasn't connected to my house. It was connected to Derek. And suddenly I had a terrible thought. Maybe they hadn't invited me to Arizona because they needed my signature. Maybe they had invited me because they already knew something was coming. I looked at Nadia. Can you find out who received this money? She nodded. Then she turned the document toward me. And when I saw the name, I realized my daughter might not have been the person controlling this plan. She might have been trapped inside it. The name on that transaction wasn't Derek's. It wasn't Lauren's either. It belonged to a company I'd never heard of. Redstone Advisory Partners. I stared at the page until the letters seemed to blur. Who are they? I asked. Nadia shook her head. I don't know yet, but the payment was made from an account connected to Derek's business. How much? She told me. It was just over $38,000. My stomach tightened. Why would Derek send that kind of money to a company I've never heard of? Nadia didn't answer. She simply looked at the date again. 3 days before Lauren called me. 3 days before she suddenly wanted me in Arizona. I leaned back in my chair. The timing was too perfect, but I still didn't want to believe what my mind was suggesting. Could it be legitimate? Absolutely, Nadia said. But we need to know what they were paid for. That afternoon I called Martin. He told me not to contact Derek. Not yet. Let me investigate first, he said. And Samuel, don't warn anyone that you're looking. I agreed. That was the hardest part. Doing nothing. I'd spent my entire life fixing problems as soon as I saw them. But this time, rushing could destroy the only advantage I had. So I waited. 2 days later, Martin called. His voice was different. Samuel, I found something. I sat down. What? Redstone Advisory isn't a construction company. Then what are they? A financial consulting firm. I frowned. That doesn't sound illegal. No, it isn't. He paused. But they specialize in restructuring distressed companies. My chest tightened. Distressed? Companies facing major financial exposure. I closed my eyes. Suddenly, Derek's obsession with the deed made sense. The rushed signature. The fake flight change. The pressure. The mysterious financing deadline. But Martin wasn't finished. There's another detail. What? Redstone was hired shortly before the deed was prepared. I felt cold despite the summer heat. So they knew. We can't say that yet. Then what can we say? That someone was planning for Derek's company to come under financial pressure. I stood and walked toward the window. Across the street, a little boy was riding a bicycle. For some reason, the sight reminded me of Lauren at 8 years old. She used to ride her bike down this same sidewalk. I'd run behind her, one hand hovering near the seat. She'd always shout, "Dad, let go." And I'd say, "Not yet." Eventually, I had to let go. I realized I'd never really stopped holding on. Even when Lauren became an adult. Even after she married Derek. Even after she started treating me like an emergency account instead of a father. I kept holding on. Because Evelyn had always told me Lauren needed room to make her own mistakes. But what if those mistakes weren't hers? What if someone had been making decisions for her? That question wouldn't leave me alone. The next morning, Martin sent me another document. It was a public filing connected to Derek's development company. I read the first page. Then the second. Then I saw a familiar name. Lauren. My hands started shaking. She wasn't listed as an employee. She wasn't listed as an executive. Her name appeared somewhere much more important. As a personal guarantor. I read the sentence twice. Then a third time. Lauren had apparently guaranteed part of a financial obligation tied to Derek's company. And suddenly, the airport scene looked different. She hadn't simply been cold. She had been terrified. I called her. She didn't answer. I tried again. Nothing. Then my phone buzzed. A text message. From Lauren. "Dad, please don't ask questions over the phone." I stared at it. Another message appeared. Derek doesn't know I'm talking to you. My heart began pounding. I typed. Then tell me what's really happening. The typing bubble appeared. Disappeared. Appeared again. Then nothing. 5 minutes passed. 10. Finally, one last message arrived. I never wanted you to sign that deed. I stopped breathing. Before I could respond, another message appeared. But if you don't help us, he says he'll make sure you never see Sophie again. I read it twice. Then I felt something deeper than anger. Fear. Not for my house. Not for my money. For my granddaughter. Because suddenly, I wasn't looking at a greedy daughter trying to take her father's home. I was looking at a daughter who might have been trapped inside a marriage I didn't fully understand. And then my phone rang. It was not Lauren. It was an unknown Arizona number. I answered. A man's voice said quietly, "Mr. Mercer, if you want to protect your granddaughter, you need to listen carefully." I stood completely still. Then he said the one thing that made my blood run cold. Your son-in-law isn't trying to save his company. He's trying to hide what he already did. And before I could ask what he meant, the line went dead. For several seconds, I couldn't move. The phone was still pressed against my ear, but the caller was gone. I heard only silence. Then I looked at the message from Lauren again. I never wanted you to sign that deed. Those words changed everything. Until that moment, I had believed my daughter was helping Derek use me. Now I wasn't sure. Maybe she'd been trying to survive him. I immediately called Martin. He answered on the first ring. "Samuel, I need you to find everything you can about Derek's company." There was a pause. Everything. Everything. By the next afternoon, Martin had a stack of documents waiting for me. The financial picture was worse than I imagined. Derek's company wasn't simply struggling. It was bleeding money. Several investors had already demanded explanations about the Canyon Crest development. Contractors were complaining about delayed payments. And one lender had apparently begun asking difficult questions about the company's collateral. But then Martin showed me something that made all the pieces connect. A new line of credit had been discussed shortly before my trip to Arizona, and one of the conditions involved additional property security. My property. My house. The house Evelyn and I had spent decades paying for. Suddenly, the phrase Derek had used came back to me. Financing timing. He hadn't been talking about some distant future. He'd been talking about days. Maybe hours. I looked at Martin. If I had signed that deed, how quickly could they have used the house? Potentially very quickly. I felt sick. Then Martin placed another paper on the table. This is where things become interesting. The document showed that someone had contacted a financial consultant on behalf of Derek's company. The consultant had been asked to examine what assets could be brought into the company's financial structure. And my house was listed. Not as a possibility. As an asset they were actively considering. I stared at the page. They had already counted my house. Martin nodded. Before I could respond, my phone vibrated. Lauren. I answered immediately. Dad. Her voice sounded exhausted. Where are you? I can't tell you. Lauren, what is happening? She started crying. Not the quiet tears I'd heard before. This time, she couldn't control herself. Derek found out I texted you. My grip tightened around the phone. What did he do? He said I betrayed him. Did he hurt you? No. She hesitated. Not physically. Those 3 words told me more than anything else could have. I stood up. Lauren, listen to me. You and Sophie can come here. I can't. You can. You don't understand. Then help me understand. She went quiet. Finally, she whispered. Derek has been lying to everyone. I closed my eyes. What about the development? He told investors the soil problems were minor. And they weren't. No. Her voice broke. They knew there were problems before construction started. I felt my stomach drop. Who knew? Derek. And you. I found out later. How much later? After the first foundations started cracking. I sat down slowly. Lauren, why didn't you tell me? Because I thought I could fix it. There was something painfully familiar about that sentence. She sounded like me. A child trying to protect her family by carrying something too heavy. Then she said something that changed my understanding completely. Dad, Derek didn't just use your house. What do you mean? He used my name too. I looked toward Martin. He was watching my face. Lauren continued. I signed papers because he told me they were temporary guarantees. He said everything would be removed once the project sold. Did you read them? A long silence. No. My heart sank. Why? Because I trusted my husband. That sentence came out like an apology. Then she whispered, "And now the lawyers are saying I could be responsible too." I didn't know what to say. This was my daughter, the little girl who used to sleep on my chest during thunderstorms, the woman I'd spent years rescuing. And now she was standing inside a disaster she hadn't created alone. I wanted to tell her everything would be okay, but I had finally learned the danger of promises made without knowing the facts. So I said the only thing I could honestly say. "You and Sophie are not facing this alone." She began crying again. Then suddenly her voice changed. "Dad, there's one more thing." "What?" "I found something in Derek's office." "What did you find?" She took a breath. "A folder with your name on it." My heart stopped. "What was inside?" "I don't know." "Why not?" "Because Derek walked in before I could open it." I stood. "Where is the folder now?" "I don't know." Then she whispered, "But I saw the label." "What did it say?" There was a long pause. Then Lauren said, "Marlo Avenue, final asset protection." The call ended. I looked at Martin. Neither of us spoke. Because now I understood something terrifying. They hadn't discovered my house by accident. They'd been planning around it. And somewhere inside Derek's office was a folder that could prove exactly when the plan began. But before I could decide what to do next, my phone rang again. This time it was Sophie. My granddaughter's voice was barely above a whisper. "Grandpa." "Yes, sweetheart. Mom told me not to call you." My heart tightened. "Are you okay?" She hesitated. Then she said, "I found something too." "What did you find?" "I found a copy of that folder." I stopped breathing. "And Grandpa," her voice trembled, "I think Derek knows I have it." "Grandpa, I think Derek knows I have it." Sophie whispered those words, and every instinct in me screamed to get her away from that house. "Sweetheart, where are you right now?" "In my room." "Is your mother there?" "No." "Is Derek there?" She didn't answer. That silence was enough. "Sophie, lock your bedroom door." I heard a tiny click. Then her voice came back. "It's locked." "Good. Now listen carefully. Don't confront Derek. Don't tell him you're talking to me. And don't open that folder until you're somewhere safe." "But Grandpa, I need you to trust me." "I do." Her voice cracked. That nearly destroyed me. Because 15-year-old Sophie shouldn't have been hiding evidence from her stepfather in her bedroom. She should have been worrying about school, robotics, friends, the normal problems teenagers complain about, not whether an adult was going to discover what she'd found. I put the phone on speaker and looked at Martin. He immediately understood. "Tell her to photograph every page," he whispered. I nodded. "Sophie, can you take pictures of the documents without making noise?" "Yes." "Do it one page at a time. Send them directly to me." A few seconds passed. Then my phone began receiving photographs. The first page looked ordinary. Property information. My Tulsa address. The legal description of my house. Then came the second page. My name. My estimated home value. My mortgage status. My retirement assets. I felt a chill move through me. Someone had prepared a financial profile on me. Not casually. Professionally. The third page was worse. It contained a timeline. Beside one date was a note. Obtain signature before lender review. Beside another. Add property to collateral package. And then I saw a date that made my blood run cold. It was 2 weeks before Lauren had ever invited me to Arizona. I looked at Martin. "This started before the trip." He nodded slowly. "Much earlier." Another photograph arrived. This one showed an email. The sender was a financial consultant. The recipient was Derek. The subject line read, "Mercer Property, Execution Strategy." I couldn't read the rest immediately. My vision blurred. Execution strategy. They hadn't been thinking about my inheritance. They had been thinking about how to get control of my property. Then another photograph appeared. This one contained a handwritten note. I recognized the handwriting. Lauren's. There were only a few lines. "Dad won't sign if he knows about the lawsuit." My heart sank. For one horrible moment, I thought she'd been part of everything. Then I read the next line. "Derek says he'll lose everything if the financing fails." And underneath it, "I don't know how to stop him without destroying our family." I closed my eyes. My daughter hadn't been planning my betrayal. She'd been trapped between protecting her father and protecting her marriage. But there was still something I couldn't understand. Why had she abandoned me at the airport? Then Sophie sent one final photograph. I opened it. It was a handwritten note from Derek. Only one sentence was clearly visible. "If Harold leaves Arizona without signing, activate Plan B." My stomach turned. What is plan B? I whispered. Before Sophie could answer, we heard a sound through the phone. A door opening. Sophie stopped breathing. Grandpa, stay quiet. Footsteps moved down the hallway. Slowly. Then they stopped outside her bedroom. Someone tried the handle. Once. Twice. Sophie covered the phone with her hand, but I could still hear the faint movement. Then Derek's voice came through. Sophie? She didn't answer. Open the door. I felt helpless. I was hundreds of miles away. I couldn't reach through that phone and protect her. I couldn't even protect my own daughter. But Martin was already standing. Samuel, call the police. Before I could respond, Sophie whispered. Grandpa, there's another way out. What? My bedroom connects to the garage. Go. She moved quietly. I heard the door open. Then footsteps. Then nothing. For nearly 30 seconds, there was complete silence. Finally, Sophie's voice returned. I'm outside. I exhaled. Where? Across the street. Stay there. Don't go home. Then she said something that made my heart stop again. Grandpa. Yes. I took the folder. I looked at Martin. What else was inside? Her voice dropped. There was a second envelope. What was in it? I haven't opened it. Why? Because it has your name on the front. My hands went cold. Open it. There was a pause. Then I heard paper tearing. Sophie gasped. What is it? She didn't answer. Sophie? Finally she whispered. Grandpa. What? This isn't about your house. I froze. Then what is it about? Her breathing became uneven. Then she said, it's about what happened to Grandma before she died. And for the first time in 3 years, I wondered if my wife's death had left behind a secret none of us had ever been meant to discover. Sophie's words left me unable to speak. This is about Grandma. For 3 years, I had believed Evelyn's death was exactly what the doctors told me. A sudden illness. A rapid decline. A tragedy no one could have prevented. I had never questioned it. Because when you lose the person you've loved for decades, sometimes you don't investigate the pain. You simply survive it. But now my granddaughter was standing somewhere across the street from her own house, holding an envelope with my name on it. Sophie, I said carefully, tell me what you see. There was silence. Then she whispered, it's an insurance document. My heart sank. Life insurance? Yes. Whose? She hesitated. Grandma's. I looked at Martin. His face had gone completely serious. Sophie, take a picture. She did. The image appeared on my phone. It showed an insurance policy I'd never seen before. The beneficiary wasn't me. It wasn't Lauren. And it wasn't Derek. The beneficiary was a company. A company connected to one of Derek's financial advisors. I felt dizzy. Grandpa? I'm here. There's more. She turned another page. There was a payment history. One large payment had been made shortly before Evelyn died. Not to a hospital. Not to a doctor. To the same consulting company that had recently been working with Derek. My hands began trembling. No. Martin took the phone from me. He studied the photograph. Samuel, don't assume what this means. I know what I'm looking at. You know what you're seeing. You don't yet know why. He was right. But my mind was already racing. Why would a company connected to Derek have anything to do with my wife's insurance? Why had I never seen this policy? And why was Sophie finding it inside a folder prepared for a plan involving my house? Then Sophie spoke again. Grandpa, there's a note. What does it say? She read it slowly. Review beneficiary structure after Mercer property transfer. My entire body went cold. The property transfer. My house. The deed. They had connected my property to my wife's old insurance policy. But why? I turned toward Martin. Find out everything about that company. He nodded. Then Sophie's breathing suddenly changed. Grandpa. What? I think someone is coming. Where are you? Behind the neighbor's fence. Stay there. I can't. What do you mean? I think Derek saw me leave. I stood up so quickly my chair fell backward. Call the police. Martin reached for his phone. Then Sophie whispered. Wait. What? I found another page. My heart pounded. What page? It has Mom's signature. I froze. What does it say? Sophie began reading. Authorization to transfer. Her voice stopped. What? She didn't answer. Sophie. I can't believe this. Read it. Her voice trembled. Authorization to transfer insurance proceeds into a business recovery account. I stared at Martin. Lauren signed it? Yes. My heart broke in a completely different way. For a moment, I thought my daughter had lied to me about everything. But then Sophie said something that changed it again. Grandpa. Yes. Mom signed this after Grandma died. I swallowed. That doesn't make sense. She wrote something underneath. What? Sophie read it. Derek told me this was necessary to keep the family home safe. I closed my eyes. Lauren had believed she was protecting us. Derek had apparently convinced her that moving the insurance money was temporary. But if that money had been connected to his company, then something much bigger had been happening behind our backs. And suddenly, I remembered something from the week Evelyn died. Derek had insisted on handling several financial matters because I was too overwhelmed. At the time, I'd been grateful. I had trusted him. Maybe that had been my mistake. Then Sophie's voice became barely audible. Grandpa. What? There's one last page. I waited. She sounded frightened. It's a letter from Grandma. My heart stopped. My wife wrote a letter? I think so. Read it. I can't. Why? Because it starts with your name. I closed my eyes. Then Sophie read the first sentence. Samuel, if you're reading this, something has gone terribly wrong. For 3 years, I had believed I was grieving a woman I'd lost. Now I was beginning to wonder whether I had been grieving without knowing the whole truth. And then Sophie read the final line on the page. My blood ran cold. Do not trust Derek with your house, your money, or Lauren. I couldn't breathe. Because if Evelyn had written those words before she died, then she had known something was coming. And somehow, Derek had spent 3 years making sure I never found out. But there was one question that haunted me more than all the others. How had Evelyn known? How did Grandma know? I asked the question without realizing I had spoken aloud. Sophie was still on the phone. Martin stood beside me, holding the photograph of Evelyn's letter. For 3 years, I had believed my wife's final days were filled with fear because she knew she was dying. Now I wondered if she had been afraid because she knew something else. Grandpa, Sophie whispered, there's a date on the letter. What date? The day before Grandma went into the hospital. My heart sank. I remembered that day. Evelyn had seemed unusually quiet at breakfast. I'd asked if something was wrong. She smiled and told me she was tired. I believed her. I had no idea she was apparently preparing for a future she knew she might not live to see. Martin took the letter from my hand. Samuel, we need to preserve this. I need to know what happened. We will. No. I looked at him. I need to know now. He studied my face for a moment. Then he nodded. We read the letter together. Evelyn explained that she had become suspicious of Derek months before her death. She had discovered that he was using money from one business account to cover losses in another. She didn't accuse him of stealing from her directly. She said something more frightening. She believed Derek was building a financial structure that depended on our family assets. Our savings, my house, and eventually her insurance. Evelyn had confronted him. He denied everything. Then he told Lauren that her mother was confused because of her illness. That detail broke something inside me, because I remembered Lauren telling me almost the exact same thing. Mom's not thinking clearly, Dad. I had believed my daughter. I had never considered that someone had taught her what to believe. At the bottom of the letter, Evelyn had written one final warning. If anything happened to her, she wanted me to protect Lauren and Sophie. But she didn't want me to fight Derek with anger. She wanted me to protect our family with facts. I folded the letter carefully. For the first time since Evelyn died, I cried without trying to stop myself. Not because I had lost her. I'd already carried that loss for 3 years. I cried because she had been trying to protect me even while she was dying. And I had never known. Then Martin said something that brought me back to the present. Samuel, we need to move quickly. Within days, the documents were turned over to the appropriate attorneys. The insurance records were investigated. The financial transfers were examined. The development project was scrutinized. And the truth began to come apart piece by piece. Derek had been trying to keep Canyon Crest alive long enough to refinance its debt. The deed to my house would have given him access to an asset he didn't own. Lauren had signed documents she didn't fully understand because Derek had convinced her they were temporary. And the insurance money had been redirected under the same false promise. But the most painful truth was this. Lauren had known something was wrong long before I did. She simply hadn't known how to escape it. Eventually, she left Derek. The legal battle continued for months. I never became the man who destroyed him. I didn't need to. Facts did that. The development collapsed. Investors pursued their claims. Derek's company eventually dissolved. But my real victory wasn't watching his business disappear. It was watching Lauren slowly become herself again. One evening, she came to my house alone. She stood on the porch for nearly a minute before knocking. When I opened the door, she was crying. "I don't expect you to forgive me." I looked at my daughter, the same little girl who once rode a bicycle down this street. "You don't have to ask me for forgiveness tonight." She looked confused. "Then what do I do?" I stepped aside. "You come inside." She started crying harder. And when she hugged me, I held her the way I had when she was 8 years old. For the first time in years, I didn't feel like her father because she needed something. I felt like her father because she was my daughter. Sophie still calls me every Sunday. Sometimes she talks about robotics. Sometimes school. Sometimes she tells me absolutely nothing important. And I love those conversations most of all, because I finally understand what Evelyn tried to teach me. Love isn't measured by how much you sacrifice. It's measured by whether the people you love respect the person making those sacrifices. I still live in the same house. The house Derek once tried to turn into collateral. The house Evelyn and I built our life inside. But I changed one thing. I stopped treating my home as something I owed to everyone else. It became a place where people were welcome because they loved me, not because they needed something from me. Months later, I received another call from Daniel. He offered me a consulting position with his engineering company. Part-time. My own schedule. He said he wanted my experience because I could still see weaknesses younger engineers missed. I accepted. Not because I needed the money. Because I had spent too many years believing my usefulness was the only reason people kept me around. Daniel reminded me that wasn't true. He had found me at an airport when I thought my own daughter had left me with nothing. But she hadn't. Not entirely. That terrible afternoon had stripped away something I thought I couldn't live without. The illusion that family means never saying no. The illusion that love requires endless rescue. And the illusion that being needed is the same thing as being loved. Sometimes I still think about that Phoenix airport. The heat. The 2 suitcases. Derek's forgotten jacket hanging from my hand. And Lauren's car disappearing into traffic. For 40 minutes, I believed I had been abandoned. Now I understand something different. I wasn't abandoned. I was being redirected. Away from people who saw my generosity as an opportunity. Toward people who remembered my name when I had nothing to offer them. Toward my granddaughter, who called because she wanted to hear my voice. Toward Daniel, who remembered the young engineer I'd once believed in. Toward the truth Evelyn had left behind. And most importantly, back toward myself. I spent 36 years studying foundations. I thought I knew what made something strong. Now I know. A strong foundation isn't built from money. It isn't built from blood. And it certainly isn't built from fear. It's built from trust. Respect. Respect. And people who stay beside you when there is absolutely nothing they can gain by staying. That day at the airport, my daughter drove away believing she'd left me standing alone. She was wrong. Because sometimes the moment someone walks away from you is the exact moment you finally discover who was meant to walk toward you. And that was the greatest lesson Evelyn ever left me. Never confuse the people who need your help with the people who truly need you. If this story touched something inside you, tell me in the comments where you're listening from. And remember, sometimes losing the people you thought were your foundation is how you finally discover what a real foundation looks like.